Yeah.
So if people want to ask some questions, they can sit in this chair and use this mic.
Hey, actually, Julian.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just
Swing this around. Yeah.
Also, is that like Julian got his closing statement there on the entities thing. My closing statement is ultimately that I personally just don't think anything is exactly as it appears to be. Period.
How long are you going into the float tank for on mushrooms or whichever compound?
When I did it, 3 hours, and I actually waited. It was 3 grams of psilocybin cubensis mushrooms, and I waited a couple of hours for it to peak, and then I had that 3 hours, and that was great. I think that probably in Melbourne the most you can book is 2 hours, but in Estonia I had a good deal.
I've never been in a float tank for longer than 90 minutes, and when I did I've only had one full-blown mushroom experience in the tank, and I was in there as long as I needed to be in there to be finished, and then when I was finished, I got out, and I believe that was about like just over an hour, because I had a friend that I was like, hey, can you just come in and check in on me at an hour and a half just to make sure I'm okay? And for me, it was just over an hour. I've never been in a float tank longer than 90 minutes. I get cold. I can't handle it.
No, quantity. Sorry.
How many times have I floated? Quantity of mushrooms. I had about, I think, 3.5 grams in a big drink of raw chocolate with Heishu Wu. Raw chocolate and Heishu Wu are both MAOIs, so they potentiate the effect as well. So. Yeah, they were cubensis, just standard Ziploc bag cubensis.
Have either of you had an experience with ketamine in the float tank, and you are familiar with John Lilly research much at all?
Yeah, I'm mildly familiar with John Lilly's research. I read Center of the Cyclone, and I've looked into some of the history of the float tank. John C. Lilly invented the float tank for everyone that's here, and he also discovered ketamine in the sense that for himself he discovered that ketamine could take you exactly to where the float tank takes you, and that if you mix ketamine and the float tank, it's extra awesome. It also almost killed him a few times. So I've had experiences with ketamine and float tanks and reading John C. Lilly. I've never mixed all of them at the same time.
I think, ketamine, if you're doing ketamine intramuscular, which is the way it should be done if you're going to use it seriously, you're not going to even know you're floating, and I don't know how you could kill yourself. You turned around, is that it?
I think he just like water got him.
Oh, okay, yep. I would, really not recommend that at all. Ketamine by itself will take you deeply. So John Lilly, he was taking just 100 mics of, this is Sandoz acid. Like the stuff you get today is a lot more messy and dirty. And I mean, if you had some really clean, clear Sandoz acid, I could imagine you could possibly go very deep with just 100 mics in the float tank. But that's what he was doing, and doing long journeys. I met some guys in Estonia who just floated for overnight, and it's the temperature of your body. It's body temperature, so I don't get cold. After a few hours, I start to feel a little bit weird with the magnesium sulfate. It makes me feel a little bit weird, but it's good for you.
A quick comment about magnesium. Magnesium sulfate is what you're floating in, and magnesium is also an essential mineral. And you absorb that magnesium into your skin, which goes into various glutamate receptors, which is where the magnesium binds to help to inhibit the overfiring of glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter that too much overfiring causes basically those neurons to die off or close down even. This is also called excitotoxicity. And the same channel on the NMDA receptors, you can imagine it's like a tube receptor and transmitter, and it comes into the tube in a very specific place to block the sending of excitatory messages with glutamate, magnesium, ketamine bind to the exact same receptor site with different trapping ratios. So there's something to be said there too about the neurophysiological and neurochemical relationship between ketamine and floating as well.
Thanks, guys. Going back to the point you made about feeling anxious before going into a psychedelic experience, there is this concept that with ayahuasca that there's a divine spirit and in the ayahuasca tea, and that she will only give you the amount of kind of personal insight and hardcore information that you can handle at that stage in your life. And so I got a question. I'm interested in both your experience of the difference between like the intelligence or the compassion of the entheogen between, for example, psilocybin mushrooms and ayahuasca and the cacti, compared to synthetically made entheogens like LSD and or ketamine, and whether there's any difference between, with the synthetic ones, between those that are made in a laboratory compared to those, well, in a kind of pharmaceutical laboratory compared to those made by the mythical sort of spiritual wizard LSD chemist. So if there's actually different, if you notice a difference in the experience in terms of the intelligence behind the molecule.
Yeah, so I guess, Julian, you mind if I jump in on this first? Yeah. I personally believe that everything that we interact with has some level of intelligence, but let's just say that not so much intelligence in the sense that we think about intelligence, but meaning. I know that seems like totally different things, but meaning in the sense that there's an intelligence in what these substances can be present as a rendering of meaning in the being, and meaning being like a primary angle through which we experience reality. And so the mushrooms and ayahuasca, I've never had cactus, the mushrooms and ayahuasca, they have this really potent meaning. They're the extension of a very long process of evolution, and they've been used by humans for, mushrooms, since the dawn of humankind, and ayahuasca for what, like 2,000 years or something, maybe longer. So there's a deep meaningfulness there, like a reservoir that could be tapped into that's there, and with some of the synthetic ones, I don't think it's there as much, but it is there. There's still an intelligence there that's capable. I also think that generally it's better to have things in their whole food form, right? But that specific extracts can have very specific tailored results. And what you mentioned there about being able to trust that the plant, like ayahuasca, will only give you so much as you're able to handle. This is something that I remind myself when like it gets really, really heavy. And I don't think the same is true for some of the synthetic ones. You get as much as your dose delivers, period. But then again, there's a lot of me just layering human concept onto that, right? So like Julian, you said something like, how do we measure the subjective experience, right? So, there's another way to say that. I know I spoke with Martin Ball, Martin W. Ball. He works primarily with 5-MeO-DMT, which is natural but also synthetic and extracted. And he said, the medicine always gives you as much as you need. You always take as much as you need, even when you think it's too much, right? And the same could maybe go for the synthetic chemicals too. You think that it's too much, but you really gave yourself exactly what you need. So I think it can extend, but I also think that synthetic chemicals don't have the same intelligence or meaning that is possible in natural plant-based ones.
So in my book, I actually call the spirit or the deva of a synthetic chemical an anima. An anima is a word that it means spirit in Greek. So you could, I thought to myself, maybe I could apply that rather than say plant spirit, which some people, as soon as you say that, people are like, well, again, he's obviously not credible. Like, plants are dead. Everyone knows plants are dead. However, yeah, plant spirits become evident when you start taking them a lot. And for me, I guess I've been making flower essences since the late 90s before I even got into any of this, and so I understood that actually plants were sentient. But going back, I call the spirit of these chemicals the anima, and so they have a spiritual form. They have an intelligence, and they communicate with us. And when I take LSD, I communicate with the anima of the LSD. And in a way, I'm communicating with a specific batch of LSD, because LSD is not purely synthetic, it's semi-synthetic. It comes from an ergot fungus. So it's this ergot fungus that's sort of been tweaked into this form that it can access our neurobiology. So I experience this as a living entity and communicate with it. And I think that, yes, if it is this sort of mythical alchemist, the experience is going to be smoother, and you're going to have the birth of a much more, the child is going to be, the anima is going to be much more kind of alive and nurtured. It's going to be the awareness of the chemist, the creation of the chemical is going to result in a much smoother experience. Whereas I remember once taking 2CE, which is generally made in China in labs there by Chinese guys who have basically just following a recipe, and I had a vision, a very blocky kind of 8-bit vision with this Chinese guy with sort of chopsticks coming out of his mouth, like a bit all over the place, like he just cooked up this stuff. And I didn't know that it had come from that source. I could only presume that it had. So in that instance, the anima is communicating with me and telling me about its origin and saying, well, I was put together by some Chinese guys who just, did have no experience of 2CE. That was just monetarily based. So I really do believe that when you're taking these chemicals, especially 5-MeO, I've had 5-MeO from Switzerland. I've had quite a few different batches. That is made by people who actually take 5-MeO, and it's amazing stuff. It is a whole other level. Whereas the Chinese stuff made in the lab, they've never taken it. They just have dollar signs in their eyes. It's very, very different. Very, very different. Even though chemically, no one's selling 95% pure 5-MeO. It's all 99.8, 99.9. So you're going to have vast differences between chemicals. I even find there's differences in Valium from different countries. And also, I have friends who've traveled through South America showing me pictures of all the ketamine vials from each country. It's completely different. I remember doing ketamine in Goa, and I had a really profound experience, more like DMT than ketamine. And I came back, and there was sort of like a Bollywood movie star, he was the final act, and he was sort of coming at me saying, and that's all we got for tonight, fella. I hope you enjoyed that. So it's, I think that everything is consciousness, everything is intelligent, everything is intelligence, because it has to be. There's no place in manifestation or existence which is just dead. It's just empty. This is Western science for you. It's ridiculous. It's like plant. No, they have no intelligence. Rocks, they're nothing. They're just dead, empty space. I think it's all intelligent. It's all conscious. Another question. Did you want to use that?
And the ABC this week, there was a Q&A show, and there was a lot of physicists that were there, and they were saying with string theory and the multiverse, there's no way of proving it. And I think when you have a DMT experience, it certainly proves that there is a multiverse, there is parallel universes. I believe the entities you meet there are real for you in that place at that time. Conversely to mushrooms, which I had prior, DMT taught me to relinquish, whereas all my prior mushroom experiences up to there was more of a fight. DMT challenges you and says you have to let go. The interesting thing about entities, though, even though I've been presented with so many entities with DMT and 5-MeO, which personally I find a more sinister edge to, but that's probably just my experience, that mushrooms, whether it be psilocybin or whether it be muscarine based, you fly agaric, which is quite a different experience, and I don't find many people doing muscaria in Australia. I'm wondering, do you believe the mushroom is more of an entity unto itself that presents you with the journey rather than DMT that says relinquish all this and meet these entities?
Yeah, okay, so that question, actually, I very much do believe that the mushrooms are an entity unto themselves, in the same way that I can observe them. They are their own organism, and they definitely seem to have their own, I guess, intention. With DMT, it's very highly tailored. It's like very specific, kind of breaking open. You have to totally relinquish. But yeah, to echo what Julian said there about how everything has intelligence, right? I said that everything has a meaning, right? And that meaningfulness is partially constructed by the way humans engage it, and is also partially expressive of the metaphysical background of what we perceive as reality and the various, input that goes into that reality, in the sense that trees have intelligence, and you can feel and listen to trees and learn from them. And you can learn from the plants, all the plants. You can learn from the mountains, or you can learn from the animals. And you can also learn from the mushrooms. And in these selections, depending on your state of consciousness, each one can speak louder or quieter than the others. And psilocybin mushrooms speak very loud when you take them. And they do seem to have a bit of a sentience, but I also perceive the sense that these mushrooms, the experience that we have, that experience doesn't exist without human consciousness employed, right? Those mushrooms exist independently on this planet, and they have a role somewhere on the ecology of the planet. And I mean, perceivably, the role that they have is directly related to us, because they don't seem to have any primary role in the ecology that holds the ecology up. They just seem to optimize in certain areas. It seems like whatever their primary role is in the ecology of the planet is directly related to us eating them. But I don't believe that the intelligence of those mushrooms and the way that we perceive it exists until human consciousness is employed. So in that, I believe there is a direction, there are experiential characteristics, and there's an intelligence that's contained in the mushroom, but it's an intelligence that's alchemically composed in a synergistic relationship between human consciousness and that mushroom, including the synergistic relationship beyond the mushrooms too, with various plants and various different brews of ayahuasca, the different potential leaves, the different potential combinations of plants to get you into the places, the different, like Julian said, the different batches of chemicals from different places. They all kind of have different themes, different angles to offer. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
So I guess we've got about another 15 minutes we designated for questions, so maybe we take another 1 or 2 questions, or even 3 if people have them. Maybe you can, or you can shout. Yeah.
Bear with me because I don't know exactly what the question formulated, but I just was interested in your perspectives of the current psychedelic underground shamanism scene. I understand that there's been lots of scrutiny in terms of screening people and assessing what people are ready for that journey. I can identify a barrier in
Yeah, yeah. Well, I personally feel when it comes to ayahuasca, everyone is ready. Actually, I think that it's really about dosage. I think that a lot of people in the underground, they don't really understand what the dosages and the ratios they're dealing with. And I think what I hear is a lot of the ayahuasca scene is underdosing people, and I think that's probably more of a problem. I would say, I think if you're going to do it, yeah, you should do it seriously, but also I think that if people are not quite ready to fully go there, they can just take a little bit and benefit a lot from it as well. So I think that what's happening is we're experiencing the plants, especially ayahuasca, there's a lot of interest, a lot of demand, and I think you're getting this sort of dispersal effect. You've got this sort of watering down effect where people, do a dieta and suddenly they think they're a shaman, and you've got a lot of human issues like ego, like sexuality and power, and this whole ayahuasca scene combines it, especially for the males. They get a hit on each of these aspects. That there is the money, there is the power, and in a out of integrity sense, sexuality as well. So you do hear a lot of stories, and I think possibly we have less people who are really, I would say possibly that there's actually a fair few people who could do this work, who are not stepping up and doing it, and the people who are stepping up and doing it are doing it for more the wrong reasons. And this is a problem in human society in general. There's a lot of good people out there, but they're just like, prefer to do landscape gardening, or, rather than really stepping up and dealing with the problems and issues. And a lot of the people who are motivated to really step up, they're motivated by, money, sex, power, and ego, etc., etc. So I think what we're really missing is people having a pure intention, and pure intentionality is like a Taoist thing. It's not just right livelihood. It's being in such a way where you're actually sharing something with people, and people are gaining value from it. And I think if you're doing that correctly, you're creating a lot of value in the world. You're creating a lot of good karma. You're creating a lot of positivity. And I think if you're doing it incorrectly, it could go the other way. So I think we're in a young, nascent era where especially this ayahuasca is exploding on the scene, and you have a lot of people who are really they're learning. They're on accelerated. They're on a steep path, I think. So not to be altogether judgmental of everyone either, because we're all learning as well. But there is a hell of a lot of ego in this world as well. There's a hell of a lot of people who want to be the shaman, and sharing ayahuasca with people is not about shamanism. It's about being a chaiwala more than anything else, as far as I'm concerned. It's what we call shamanism is a whole other thing, and that's just normally just by yourself, and that's going really deep. And I think if a lot of people, if they they say they want to be shamans or whatever, and they really see what it takes and what it involves, they'd be running, backwards as fast as they can, because it's extremely intense. It's hardcore stuff, So I think, again, as a species, we're learning and we're understanding just how deep the rabbit hole is, and how there's just so much there. our model of the world, I would say it must expand, you know, and so also our model of behavior and our way of being. I think that, yeah, say working with ayahuasca and these plants, they can be harsh teachers as well, you know. So if you get out of line, everything's just amplified many times. So for me, and you know, you've just got to really get your shit together. Otherwise, in that space, suddenly it's amplified by so many times. I just want to address another thing. What's that? Oh, one more thing, James.
It's really important.
What's that? Okay, all right.
This is really unprofessional, and I hope everyone can hold compassion for me as I pass the mic back to Julian, but I have to piss right now. Sorry for interrupting you, Julian. It has to happen. Thank you for having compassion for me. I will be right back.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, geez, James, I can't remember what the next bit was. No, I know. It was about the integration of ayahuasca. And I know two people are doing their PhDs on integrating the ayahuasca space. And yeah, what you were saying before, yes, it can unpack a lot of stuff, but yes, it's like what James was saying before, we've got to harden the fuck up, you know, and realize actually this is no fooling around. It can take months and months and months to integrate this space. It's not, you might not even be able to go back to your job. You know, it's like that. It's really serious. Like human transformation, dealing with the depths of the shadow is very serious work. You've got to be really committed and dedicated to it. It's not like golf. It's not like ayahuasca suddenly like this going to the pub or golf. It's a lot more serious than that. So this integration phase and the processing, all this stuff, and we've got to give it the respect it deserves, you know. Evolutionary, we're in a whole new ball game here. Things just opening up radically. We've all just got to, you know, respect and have a look at, you know, where humanity's come from and try and understand where we're going and be inspired by that. And like I said, you know, take it a lot more seriously. I think it's, for me, when I see people going into deeply transformational spaces, they're letting go of really a lot of stuff that is not serving them and not serving anyone else, for sure. You know, and you know they're going to go through a lot of stuff. I mean, I just see it as being incredibly positive, and it may be overwhelming at times. You know, so can roller coasters. You know, so can horror movies. It's like, so can life. Life can be pretty overwhelming a lot of the time. So, yeah, that's just what I think, Mudge.
Can I just add a comment?
Yep.
In response to the underground ayahuasca, response to the underground ayahuasca scene in Australia, something that I think is really important for people to know as a duty of care issue is that an increasing amount of the so-called ayahuasca in the ayahuasca ceremonies is not ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is the common understanding is Banisteriopsis carpi, Psychotria viritus, otherwise known as Jagubi, Hyena, Chacruna, and so on. These things are two specific species of plants, and because of the difficulties of importing those to Australia and the under-cultivation of those plants compared to the increasing demand, there's now a massive shortage of these plants. The price of them has tripled in recent years, and so a lot of people are using substitutes, most commonly Syrian root, Peganum harmala, and various species of DMT containing acacia, which can do a job as an entheogen and which can work for a lot of people. However, the safety tests that were done in recent years scientifically about the safety of ayahuasca were all done on the classic two Carpi and Viridis ayahuasca plants and were not done on Peganum harmala. I'm doing a PhD in psychiatry about ayahuasca, and I've come to understand that there is a significant difference chemically in the plants and the effects on the human brain chemistry that's significant in the different brews. And just because you've got an MAOI with DMT doesn't mean it's ayahuasca. And I say this importantly because a friend of mine died in an ayahuasca, in a so-called ayahuasca ceremony when he wasn't drinking ayahuasca. And I don't believe he would have died if he'd have been, one, drinking ayahuasca, and two, following the established safety protocols which are known in the expertise in the Amazon and are not so much known in Australia because of the lack of tradition and mentoring that has come, where there's basically a lot more plants than there are wisdom in Australia at this point.
And
so you've got a right, same as if you go into an osteopath or whatever and ask for their qualifications, everyone has a right to ask the facilitator, what exactly plants are there? Don't just call it ayahuasca. Tell me what plants are in there, who cooked it, where the plant comes from, how was it cooked, and so on. If they don't give you a straight answer, personally, I would walk out.
I think, yes, it's important to understand that, especially in Australia, and also in Europe, people use mimosa hostilis and Syrian rue as well, and that can be called ayahuasca. It's not. It's really its own thing, and I believe that acacia and Syrian rue is particularly amazing alchemy, very clarifying, and it can allow what people are looking for in ayahuasca. It can allow the visions to really come to the fore. It can be quite cerebral and visionary, whereas if you drink ayahuasca, it can, I think particularly the ayahuasca is focused, the vine is focused on doing healing work with you, and you might not have any visions. You might just feel sick and nauseous and be going through internal processes. And so I see the benefit of both concoctions, and I believe that in the Middle East people are using and have been using Syrian rue and acacia as well. And what were the indigenous people of this land using? They're probably using acacias and some sort of MAO inhibitors that we don't even know about. So I think there's, myself, I'm not stuck on ayahuasca. I like all entheogens and psychedelics, and particularly natural ones, and my specialty is in understanding the acacias as well, and the value and the teachings that they have. So yeah, I think I wouldn't say that acacia and Syrian rue is any more dangerous than ayahuasca, but I would say, like what Mudge is saying, I think we're a very young culture. There's a lot of people who are learning some hard lessons, and I believe we need to develop this culture rather than all go over to the Amazon and try and learn their way. It's certainly not. There's certainly a lot of people operating out of integrity there. There's a lot of dark sorcery, a lot of crazy stuff going on there. So from my perspective, we've got to learn and listen to the plants, learn and listen to each other, and do the work, like I said. So that's how I see it. Krusty.
Thanks for coming. I'd just like to ask where you think we are in 2016 in terms of many people discuss, and you guys might have mentioned psychedelic renaissance, global community, but also given the extreme nature of the outlaw culture, if you like, because this is essentially an aspect of outlaw culture while being an intelligent and freedom-seeking culture, and challenging the definition of community and our own beingness. And I'd just be interested if you could talk a little bit around those particular subjects.
I think first off, it's probably important to mention that this we maybe have time for one more question after this. The psychedelic renaissance, I think, is really interesting. I don't really think that psychedelic use at any point actually stopped, but now it's just, the renaissance is really in the scientific academic world. And I think that in a way that's both positive, and it can also be quite negative, because it might take a little bit too much fuel and legislation towards only a certain form of elitist type research, which is maybe touching on what was just said there about the, what was it, the admiral culture? But kind of like this, what I perceived in that was like this overseeing government body, big brother type concept. And I feel like the psychedelic renaissance is very vulnerable in the sense that we might very well lose our opportunity to develop our personal relationships to these plants if we're not careful, because as the research continues to explode, and the psychedelic renaissance, which I mean is obviously the research in academia, it's also present in what's happening in the underground, but it mostly exists in publicity online more so than anything else, and most of that publicity is just journalism more than journalism, and isn't actually helping a lot of people. And the people who already knew, they're not being told anything new anyways, they're just being given updates on what academia is learning with machines and measurements, which is important, I really, really support. But it's also, a lot of that research is coming from a place of elitism, you know? If you look at David Nichols, he runs the DMT Nexus. He wrote an article about the importance of underground psychedelic research, and he said, if you look at the people who are heading up these research projects, you know, they're not the people who are deeply passionate about psychedelics their whole lives. They're like career psychiatrists, research psychiatrists that have 40 years and 10 years and, 100 papers published underneath them and stuff. They're not, like, the average person can't hope to make their way to doing psychedelic research. And so in a lot of ways, the renaissance, if we're not careful, will be taken over by the elitist government culture. And I think it's important that it exists because it's bringing the contemplation about psychedelics having a place in Western society to the average person. And I think that's vital because most people aren't going to want to do the really serious kind of work. Like Julian, you said, if people understood what shamanism meant, they'd run for the hills backwards. Most people don't want that, you know. But if they're given an opportunity to go to their doctor and say that I'm sad and can't seem to go through my grieving process properly, and he can write them a prescription for a therapy session with a psilocybin facilitator, and they can go have that experience and they can feel comfortable talking to their friends at work about that I think culture is advancing really quickly. But if we let Big Brother keep a hold of how and what and for what reasons and to what extent we allow that renaissance to flourish, I think we're going to be hard pressed to become the type of species we have the opportunity to become with psychedelics coming back into the scene.
Yeah, I think we've got to be the change we want to see in the world, which is what I've been trying to do myself. And I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be all out. It doesn't necessarily have to be microdosing per se either, but just the dosage just above microdosing into the very light, that very gentle dose. Say, like for me, it's a gram of dried mushrooms. It is very medicinal, very helpful for my body, my psychology, my mental state. And I think that, yeah, this is you've got this emphasis on microdosing and then higher doses and the middle doses, but then there are these lower doses which you might not even be experiencing any visions or anything, but there's still, mom and pop can still be taking advantage of that, you know. And I know that, you know, I've spoken to many people, not many, but quite a few who've managed to give their mum or dad mushrooms or something. And they just said that, yeah, dad was so happy, he was just laughing in front of the TV. And like, yeah, he just seems like a happier, more balanced guy now, you know. So it doesn't always have to be elitist, and in going into this sort of the really deep and powerful internal work, it's just these lighter doses can be helpful to anyone. Like I was saying with ayahuasca, I think anyone can drink ayahuasca at the DMT dosage levels that people in the Amazon drink it. Just your average regular person in the Amazon, they drink ayahuasca, but the amount of DMT is much less than we use, and the amount of ayahuasca they use is much, much more. I heard that Alan Shoemaker said he reckoned the police told him that 500,000 people around Iquitos were drinking ayahuasca. It was an insane amount. So your average person on the street, they're like, yeah, we leave the visions and the things to the shamans, but they take the ayahuasca for their health and their well-being. And at that level, you might just begin to have some visions, and I think that sort of dosage where you having the medicinal effect and you might just have some visions or, profound realizations and processes going on is really beneficial. And I think that's, when it comes to these things, if you do feel it is your calling, it is right for you to share with people. It's not hard to do. It's not hard to be a sitter for someone and say to someone, look, I'll be there for you and you can be there for me. Or maybe if you're more experienced, that you can be their sitter. You can be there for them and just guide people. I mean, it's not that hard. There's lots of people interested. I used to know this guy, I still know this guy who'd go to nightclubs in Sydney, find the most depressed person he could, and give them DMT. And one of these people turned out to be like, he called my friend and said, mate, you saved my marriage. I went home and I rooted my wife all day. We haven't had sex for 10 years. I want to give you my van. So yeah, I guess there are perks to this sort of work, selfless work. Maybe we have one more question, hey?
Yeah, I actually just want to make a quick
Yep.
comment.
I want to make a comment on elitism that I mentioned there, the elitism of academia research. I think it's important that we don't create elitism in the underground culture for who's eating what in what ways for how long. And I just think it's very easy for us to be elitists, and especially if we feel like what we've done is important, and we attach what we've done and the feats that we've reached as some sort of justification to our egos or to our sense of self as being worthy, because then it's very easy to take that and then use it against other people accidentally, which is that personal shadow work that I spoke about earlier. And the other thing I just want to make a comment on was just like a language usage there that Julian had about being a sitter. And then he also made a comment about, if you're more experienced, you might be able to guide. And I think that's a very important distinction to be made, is that anyone can be a sitter. Being a sitter means you're there and you're watching and you're making sure they're okay. And every time that person comes out and expresses that they're afraid or something, you say, that's okay, you're safe. Just trust in the experience, or let me get you some water. It's not like, okay, what are you seeing? Dip into the vision, let the snake take you. And that's not what a sitter does. Now, a guide is a different experience. A guide is more like a shaman, and that is something that is a very long. You wouldn't ask your friend who read a book on psychology to be your therapist. So you shouldn't ask your friend who's eaten LSD a bunch of times to be your guide, right? So. What time is it? How is everyone feeling? Do we feel like we want one more question, or are you restless? Your asses are falling asleep? All of the above? Thanks.
I have one.
Okay, let's do one more question, then we're going to close. We'll keep it short. Go ahead.
I understand everyone wants to feel safe and they want their friends to feel safe, but a lot of people seem to think that they can only get a full experience by going to the Amazon to visit a shaman in a lineage for mescaline, ayahuasca, whatever. How do you want to talk about how you feel that Australian scene is very safe for going into these experiences in a very deep manner?
Well, I definitely can't comment on the Australian scene. However, I can comment on I've gone to the Amazon to drink ayahuasca, and I nearly died because of a blood glucose episode because the person who was supposed to be taking care of me didn't keep into consideration that we had all been on dieta when he started handing out pineapples. So I also know a lot of people who have come back and have been worse off than they were when they left going. And there's a lot of women in particular that end up getting sexually assaulted in the Amazon, and there's really no such thing as an authentic, indigenous tradition or ceremony that really exists anymore when you're going down for ayahuasca tourism. So I don't think going to the jungle makes it anywhere particularly safer. I think what makes it safer is going to places that are specifically tailored to Western people and the Western mind, and are basically like 5-star type retreats with all the integration stuff. That's, if you want to choose safe, that's safe, and that doesn't happen to necessarily exist in the jungle or in Peru. That might, I know these things exist in Canada. I don't doubt that they exist here in Australia as well. So that's something to be said for safety.
I concur. I think that's it. I think we've really covered a lot of ground, and I'm really happy with what we've said. And yeah, thanks for coming along. I'm going to let James say a few words.
I also want to extend a thank you for this. I'm all the way from Canada for this experience. I mean, for Maitreya, but also apparently actually to be here with you guys now. So I appreciate everyone giving your time and attention for the last little while to listen and to be in those chairs for over, 2 hours now. And I invite you to get up in just a moment, but I'm just also going to express that both Julian and I have books for sale over here, and I'm not 100% sure about Julian's career situation, but for myself, this is my bread and butter. This is what allows me to keep going and eating and doing these things and sharing this with other people. So I don't want you to buy this book or one of these books. This is a storytelling book. This Decomposing the Shadow is a nonfiction intellect book. I don't want you to buy them because they're my bread and butter. I want you to buy them because I think they're great and they would really positively benefit your life and you're inspired to do so. Same thing with Julian's book. Go up, take a look, and consider purchasing them and supporting the journey that we're both on. And also have an amazing night.
I will sign them too.
Yes, upon request.